The sword gleamed in the morning light as Prince Casimir raised it above Kieran's head. Elara screamed, held back by guards who forced her to watch. "I love you, Elara," Kieran whispered, blood soaking through his uniform. "I will always love you." The blade began its descent toward his neck. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, we must go back to where it all began. Princess Elara stood in the palace gardens at dawn, the morning mist curling around her silk gown like ghostly fingers. Behind her, standing at perfect attention as he always did, was Kieran. 21, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held secrets only she could read. The silence between them was heavy, charged with years of unspoken feelings, stolen glances, and a longing that had grown from something small and tender into something vast and desperate. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. She twisted her mother's ring on her finger, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. 3 paces behind her, Kieran shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, his hand moving to rest on the pommel of his sword. It was their language, these small gestures. She knew what each movement meant. He knew every sign of her distress, her joy, her fear. They had spent 5 years learning to speak without words, because words were dangerous. Words could be overheard. Words could destroy them both. But it had not always been this way. 5 years ago, she had been 15, traveling in a grand carriage during a summer procession through the countryside. The sun had been warm, the crowds cheerful, and she had felt safe in the cocoon of royal privilege. Then the rebels had come. They had poured from the forest like a dark tide, their faces twisted with rage and desperation. Her guards had fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered. She remembered the sound of steel on steel, the screams of horses, the way her maid had clutched her hand so tightly it left bruises. The carriage had overturned. She had crawled from the wreckage, her fine dress torn and filthy, her hair coming loose from its pins. A rebel had grabbed her arm, his breath hot and foul in her face, his knife pressed against her throat. She had been certain she would die there, bleeding in the dirt, forgotten. Then Kieran had appeared. He was 16 then, gangly and not yet fully grown into his frame, but his eyes had been fierce. He was the blacksmith's son from a nearby village, strong from years of working the forge. He had been in the forest gathering wood when he heard the commotion. He did not hesitate. He grabbed a fallen guard's sword and threw himself into the fray with a courage that defied all reason. He fought like a man possessed, and when the rebel holding Elara raised his blade to strike, Kieran had been there, his borrowed sword deflecting the blow. He had pulled her away from the chaos, shielded her with his own body, and held off the attackers until reinforcements arrived. When the dust settled and the rebels fled, the king himself had come to the scene. He had found his daughter alive because of a blacksmith's son who smelled of smoke and sweat and had blood on his hands. The king had knelt before Kieran, this common boy who had saved a princess, and made him an offer that would change both their lives forever. "You shall join the royal guard," the king had said, his voice thick with emotion. "You shall be trained, equipped, and given quarters in the palace. And you, specifically, shall be assigned to protect my daughter. You have proven yourself worthy of this honor." Kieran had looked at Elara then, truly looked at her, and she had seen something in his eyes that made her heart flutter in a way she did not yet understand. He had bowed low and accepted. The years that followed were a study in exquisite torture. She had been 16 when they celebrated her birthday with a grand ball. The ballroom had been filled with young nobles, handsome lords who danced with practiced grace and spoke honeyed words meant to win her favor. But she had not cared about any of them. Her eyes had kept drifting to the edge of the room where Kieran stood at attention in his guard's uniform, watching over her as he always did. When Lord Pemberton had spun her in a waltz, she had caught Kieran's gaze across the room, and for one heartbeat, the rest of the world had disappeared. There had been the riding accident when she was 17. Her horse had spooked, rearing and throwing her from the saddle. She had felt herself falling, the ground rushing up to meet her, and then strong arms had caught her. Kieran had somehow been there, had somehow known she would fall before she did. He had cradled her against his chest, his face so close to hers that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. They had stayed frozen like that for a moment too long, his hands on her waist, her fingers clutching his shoulders, their breath mingling in the space between them. "Are you hurt, Your Highness?" he had asked, his voice rough. "No," she had whispered. "You caught me. I will always catch you." It had been a promise and a confession all at once. Then there were the late nights when she could not sleep, when the weight of being a princess felt too heavy to bear. She would wander the corridors in her nightgown and robe, and she would always find him on patrol. They would talk in hushed voices about dreams and fears and all the things they could never say in daylight. He told her about his father's forge, the smell of hot metal, and the satisfaction of creating something useful with his hands. She told him about the loneliness of the crown, how everyone wanted something from her except for him. "What do you want from me, Kieran?" she had asked him once, her voice barely audible in the darkness. He had been silent for a long moment before answering. "I want you to be happy, Your Highness. That is all I have ever wanted." There had been the night of the winter ball when she was 19. A lord, drunk on wine and emboldened by too much revelry, had cornered her in an alcove. His hands had been grabbing, his words slurred and crude. She had tried to push him away, but he had been strong and insistent. Then Kieran had been there, appearing like a shadow given form. He had seized the lord by the collar and thrown him against the wall with such force that paintings rattled. "You will not touch Her Highness," Kieran had said, his voice low and deadly. "You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. Do you understand?" The lord had nodded frantically, all bravado gone. Kieran had released him and the man had scurried away like a rat. Then Kieran had turned to Elara, his hand going to her waist to steady her, and she had felt the heat of his palm through the silk of her gown. "Are you well, Your Highness?" His eyes had searched her face with an intensity that stole her breath. "I am now," she had whispered. His hand had lingered on her waist far longer than propriety allowed. Neither of them had cared. They had developed their own language over those years. When she twisted her mother's ring, he knew she was anxious. When he positioned himself closer to the door, it meant he sensed danger. When he stood with his hand on his sword pommel, it meant he was struggling with emotions he could not express. When she wore the blue ribbon in her hair, it meant she needed to see him alone. They communicated in glances and gestures and the smallest of touches that no one else would notice. But now she was 20, and he was 21, and the tension between them had become unbearable. She was no longer a child. He was no longer just her protector. They were a woman and a man who had loved each other in silence for far too long, and that silence was beginning to suffocate them both. The palace was preparing for the harvest festival, and the entire court was distracted with preparations. Music echoed through the halls, servants rushed about with decorations, and the kitchens were producing endless trays of delicacies. It was the perfect night for Elara to slip away, to steal a few moments of freedom from the suffocating expectations that came with her title. She moved through the crowded halls with practiced ease, nodding to courtiers and accepting their pleasantries while never stopping long enough for real conversation. Her destination was the moonlit courtyard on the east side of the palace, a place she had discovered years ago where the stone walls blocked out the noise and the fountain provided a gentle music of its own. It was her sanctuary, and tonight she needed it desperately. She stood by the fountain, trailing her fingers through the cool water, and tried to calm the racing of her heart. She knew he would follow. He always followed because it was his duty to protect her. But tonight, duty was not what drew her here. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, the familiar cadence that she would recognize anywhere. He emerged from the shadows, still in his guard's uniform, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Highness, you should not be out here alone," he said, his voice formal. "It is not safe." "I am not alone," she replied, turning to face him. "You are here. That is not what I meant." "Is it not?" She took a step toward him, emboldened by the darkness and the festival music that would cover their voices. "Kieran, truly speak with you, not the careful words we use when others might hear." He tensed, his hand tightening on his sword. "Your Highness, I beg you, do not. I love you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, 5 years of suppressed emotion breaking free like a dam bursting. "I have loved you for years, Kieran. Since that day in the forest when you saved me, perhaps. Or perhaps it was later, during those late nights when you were the only person who saw me as Elara, not as the princess. I do not know when it began, but I know it is consuming me. I am tired of pretending. I am tired of stolen glances and careful distance. I love you, and I can no longer remain silent." Kieran's face had gone pale in the moonlight. "Your Highness, this cannot be. You know it cannot." I am nothing, a blacksmith's son given a title he does not deserve. You are a princess. You deserve a prince, a lord, someone of your station, someone worthy. She closed the distance between them in 3 swift steps and kissed him. She had never kissed anyone before, had no notion of technique or skill, but she poured everything she felt into that kiss, every lonely night, every stolen glance, every desperate wish. For a heartbeat he was frozen, and then his arms came around her and he was kissing her back with a hunger that matched her own. His hands were in her hair, destroying the careful arrangement, and she did not care. Her fingers clutched at his uniform, pulling him closer, and still it was not close enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Elara," he whispered, using her name for the first time in 5 years. "We cannot. Your father will never permit this. The court will never accept it. I could be executed for even touching you this way. Then we shall leave." Her voice was fierce, desperate. "We could go somewhere no one knows us. I would give up the crown for you, Kieran. I would give up everything." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "You would give up your family, your home, your entire life. What life do I have without you? I am a decoration, a political piece to be moved about a board. With you, I could be myself. With you, I could be free." He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms rough against her skin. "If you truly mean this, if you are certain, then I will find a way. I swear to you, Elara, I will find a way for us to be together." "You love me then?" She needed to hear him say it. "Every day of my life since I met you," he said simply. "Every breath I take is yours. I have loved you in silence, knowing it was impossible, but loving you nonetheless. You are my heart, Elara. You always have been." They spent that night stealing moments in hidden corridors, making impossible plans in whispered voices. They would go north, perhaps, to the borderlands where no one would recognize them. He could work as a blacksmith again. She could learn to keep house. It would be hard, but they would be together, and that was all that mattered. She would tell her parents in the morning. She would make them understand. She did not care if she had to renounce her title, her claim to anything. She would choose love over duty, choose Kieran over the crown. As dawn approached, he kissed her one more time in a shadowed alcove. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow we begin our real life." "Tomorrow," she agreed, her heart full of hope for the first time in years. But tomorrow came with unexpected cruelty. Before she could seek out her parents, before she could speak the words she had rehearsed all night, a summons came. The king required her presence immediately in his private chambers. It was urgent, the messenger said. It could not wait. She went, still flushed with happiness, still believing that love could conquer all obstacles. Her father and mother were both there, their faces grave. Maps were spread across the table, correspondence bearing official seals. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Sit, Elara," her father said, and his voice was heavy with a weight she did not yet understand. She sat, her hands folding primly in her lap, her mother's ring suddenly feeling tight on her finger. "The situation with Valdoria has escalated," the king began without preamble. "There have been skirmishes along our border, their troops are massing. Our intelligence suggests they are preparing for a full invasion. Thousands would die in such a war. Perhaps tens of thousands." Elara's stomach clenched. Surely there must be some diplomatic solution. "There is." The king's eyes met hers, and she saw the apology in them before he spoke the words. "The Valdorian king has proposed a marriage alliance. His son, Prince Casimir. For you, it is the only way to avoid war." The world tilted beneath her. "No, Elara, no." She stood so quickly her chair fell backward. "Father, please, you cannot ask this of me. I cannot marry him. I do not love him. I love someone else." The queen's face hardened. "Love is a luxury you cannot afford. You are a princess. Your duty is to your people. But I love him." The words tore from her throat. "I love someone else, and he loves me. And we were going to—" "Who?" The king's voice was sharp. "Who is this man?" She faltered, suddenly afraid to name him, to bring him into this nightmare. "It does not matter. What matters is that I cannot marry Prince Casimir. Please, father, there must be another way." The king came around the table, his hands on her shoulders, his face full of sorrow. Do you think you are the first princess to love where she cannot have? Your duty is to your people. Elara. Thousands will die if there is war. Fathers will lose their sons, wives will lose their husbands, children will be orphaned. Is your happiness worth their lives? That is not fair, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It is the truth. You have 1 week to prepare. The betrothal will be announced, and Prince Casimir will arrive for the formal courtship period. You will smile, you will be gracious, you will do your duty. The queen stood as well, her voice cold. This childish infatuation will pass. You will marry Casimir. You will be queen of Valdoria, and you will thank us one day for saving you from a mistake that would have ruined your life. Elara ran from the room, her vision blurred with tears. She stumbled through corridors, past shocked servants and concerned courtiers, until she found him. Kieran was in the training yard, sparring with another guard. The moment he saw her face, he dropped his practice sword and came to her. Elara, what has happened? She could not speak. The words would not come. She simply fell into his arms and wept against his chest while he held her, asking no questions, just offering the silent comfort of his presence. When she finally found her voice, it came out broken. They are forcing me to marry Prince Casimir of Valdoria. To prevent a war. I tried to refuse. I told them I loved someone else, but they would not listen. I have 1 week before the betrothal is announced. She felt him go rigid against her. No, I have no choice. They made that very clear. If I refuse, thousands die. How can I refuse when thousands of lives hang in the balance? He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. We will run, tonight. We will take horses and ride until we are beyond their reach. They will hunt us. You know they will. They will find us, and they will execute you for taking me, and they will drag me back to marry Casimir anyway. Running will only make things worse. Then what do we do? His voice cracked. How do I stand by and watch you marry another man? I do not know, she sobbed. I do not know. They stood there in the training yard, holding each other as the world crumbled around them, knowing that in 1 week everything they felt, everything they had hoped for, would be destroyed by duty and politics and the weight of a crown. The week passed in a blur of preparation and misery. The betrothal was announced with great fanfare. The court celebrated while Elara felt herself dying inside. And then Prince Casimir arrived with his entourage, and the true torture began. He was objectively perfect, tall, classically handsome with dark hair and aristocratic features, educated, charming, saying all the correct things at precisely the correct moments. In another life, if she had never known Kieran, she might have found him pleasant. But she knew Kieran, loved Kieran, and Casimir was simply the man taking away everything she wanted. The cruelest twist was the protocol. Tradition demanded that the princess's personal guard accompany her on all outings during the courtship period. For safety, they said. For propriety. Which meant Kieran had to be there, 3 paces behind, for every moment she spent with Casimir. The first outing was a walk through the palace gardens. Casimir offered his arm, which she took with numb compliance. He spoke of poetry and philosophy, clearly trying to impress her with his learning. She responded appropriately, her training carrying her through the motions of polite conversation. But she was acutely aware of Kieran behind them, watching Casimir's fingers intertwined with hers on his arm, watching the way Casimir leaned close when he spoke, watching the life drain from the woman he loved. You seem distracted, Your Highness, Casimir observed with a slight frown. Forgive me, my lord. I am merely overwhelmed by all of this. Quite understandable. A betrothal is a significant matter. He patted her hand in what was probably meant to be a comforting gesture. I am certain we shall suit very well once you grow accustomed to the idea. She glanced back, just for a moment, and saw Kieran's jaw clenched so tightly she feared his teeth would crack. The formal dinners were worse. Casimir sat beside her at the high table, leaning close to whisper observations that made the court laugh. His hand would brush her arm, rest briefly on her shoulder. Each touch was proper, appropriate, exactly what was expected, and each touch was a knife in both her heart and Kieran's. She could see him standing against the wall in his guard's uniform, his hands behind his back, his face a careful mask that did not quite hide the agony in his eyes. Then came the opera. The royal box was lavishly appointed, and Casimir sat beside her, his arm draped along the back of her chair, almost around her shoulders. She could barely focus on the performance. Every nerve in her body was aware of Kieran standing in the shadows behind them, close enough to hear every word Casimir spoke, close enough to see every gesture, but unable to do anything except watch. During the intermission, Casimir leaned very close to comment on the soprano's technique, his breath warm against her ear, and she saw Kieran's hand move to his sword hilt before he caught himself. The engagement ball was the worst of all. The ballroom was filled with nobility from both kingdoms, all there to witness the formal announcement of the alliance. Casimir led her onto the dance floor for the first waltz, his hand at her waist, spinning her around the ballroom while everyone watched and approved. The music swelled, couples parted to give them room, and she felt like she was drowning. She searched the crowd desperately and found Kieran standing near the far wall. Their eyes met across the expanse of polished marble and glittering chandeliers. The longing in his expression, the absolute agony, was so raw that she nearly stumbled in the dance. "Are you quite well, Your Highness?" Casimir asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Perfectly well, my lord," she lied, forcing her attention back to him. "I merely turned too quickly. You must be more careful. I should be devastated if my bride were to injure herself." His bride. The words made her want to scream. There was a public promenade through the city so the people could see their future queen and the alliance that would bring peace. Casimir offered his arm with practiced gallantry, waving to the crowds who cheered enthusiastically. Behind them, Kieran walked in his guard uniform, close enough to hear every compliment Casimir paid her, every charming observation, every carefully constructed phrase designed to win her affection. The crowds threw flowers, children waved ribbons, merchants called out blessings. Everyone was so happy about this marriage. Everyone except the two people whose hearts were breaking. Between the official engagements, Elara and Kieran stole moments that only made everything worse. Passing in a corridor, their hands would brush for half a second, neither able to acknowledge it. She dropped her fan once, and he retrieved it, their fingers touching for a heartbeat longer than necessary before a servant rounded the corner and they had to step apart. Late one night, unable to sleep, she found him on his usual patrol route. They had perhaps 5 minutes before another guard would pass. "I cannot bear this," she whispered, "watching you watch him touch me, knowing what you must be thinking, feeling." "I think of how I would kill him if I could," Kieran said quietly. "I think of 1,000 ways I could end his life and take you away from here. And then I remember that I am nothing, that you are a princess, and that my fantasies of violence change nothing. You are not nothing. You are everything. Everything that you cannot have." His voice was bitter. "The blacksmith's son who saved your life and was fool enough to fall in love with you. Do not speak that way. Please, Kieran." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. They stepped apart immediately, her face turning away, his stance shifting to formal attention. The other guard passed with a nod, seeing nothing amiss. When the footsteps faded, Kieran spoke without looking at her. "You should return to your chambers, Your Highness. It grows late." She left without another word because there was nothing left to say. The night before the wedding, Elara could not sleep. The wedding gown hung in her chamber like a ghost, white silken pearls that would mark her as Casimir's property. In a few hours, she would walk down that aisle. She would speak vows that would bind her to him forever. She would become the Princess of Valdoria, and she would lose herself entirely. She slipped from her chambers in her nightgown and robe, moving through the sleeping palace on instinct. She found him in the stables, checking the horses as he often did when he could not sleep. The moment he saw her, his professional composure cracked. Elara. Just her name, spoken like a prayer and a curse. She ran to him, and he caught her, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. They kissed desperately, frantically, knowing it was the last time. His hands were in her hair, her fingers clutching at his shirt, and they were both crying. "Come with me," she begged between kisses. "We will run away tonight, right now. We will go somewhere they will never find us. Please, Kieran, please." "They will hunt us down," he said, his voice breaking. "They will execute me and drag you back in chains. I will not do that to you. I will not be the reason you lose everything. Then I will have nothing of you. Not even a memory I can speak aloud?" He pulled back, his hands shaking as he reached for the silver insignia pinned to his uniform. It was the symbol of his position in the Royal Guard, the pin he had worn for 5 years, He unfastened it and pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "Keep this," he said hoarsely. "Hide it where no one will find it, and know that every day of my life, every breath I take, I am yours, even if I cannot be with you. Even if you are in his arms, you are my heart, Elara. You always will be." She clutched the insignia so tightly the edges cut into her palm. "I should have run away with you that first night. When you asked me, I should have chosen love over duty. You chose to save thousands of lives. There is honor in that, even if it destroys us both." They held each other as dawn began to break, neither willing to let go, both knowing they must. When the first light crept through the stable windows, she stepped back, looked at him one final time, and walked away. She looked back once at the stable door. He was standing exactly where she had left him, broken and still, watching her go. The wedding was a spectacle of unprecedented grandeur. The cathedral was packed with nobility from both kingdoms, the pews filled with silks and jewels and the scent of expensive perfumes. Elara wore cloth of gold that weighed so heavily she could barely move. She felt like a beautiful doll being arranged for display, lifeless and hollow. Kieran stood with the other royal guards in perfect formation along the wall. He had to watch every moment of it, her father walking her down the endless aisle, her hand trembling on his arm. The archbishop droning through the ceremony in a voice that seemed to come from very far away. The vows she spoke in a voice so hollow it did not sound like her own. "I, Elara Josephine Catherine, do take thee, Casimir Augustus Valentin, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Until death. She wanted to laugh at the bitter irony. She was already dead inside. Casimir lifted her veil, his expression satisfied. He kissed her, and it was cold, perfunctory, nothing like the desperate passion she had shared with Kieran in the stables. The congregation applauded. Trumpets sounded. They were proclaimed husband and wife, prince and princess of Valdoria. Everyone was so very pleased. Kieran's hand had gone instinctively to where his insignia used to be, finding nothing. It was a useless gesture, a phantom pain for a phantom piece of metal now hidden against Elara's heart beneath layers of golden silk. He wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything except stand perfectly still in formation while the woman he loved was given to another man. But he was a soldier. This was his duty. So he stood, and he watched, and something inside him died. Immediately after the ceremony, Elara had to leave for Valdoria. The journey would take 4 days by carriage. She was accompanied by Valdorian guards now, her security transferred to her new husband's kingdom. She was permitted to bring 3 maids from home, her only connection to everything she was leaving behind. Her parents embraced her, both crying. Her mother whispered apologies that came too late. Her father held her like he did not want to let go. As she approached the carriage that would carry her away, she looked back at the palace one final time. The guards were still in formation on the steps. Kieran was among them, tall and straight, his face carefully blank. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and she touched her bodice where she had sewn a hidden pocket to hold his insignia against her heart. He saw the gesture. He understood. Then a Valdorian guard opened the carriage door, and she climbed inside. The door closed with a finality that echoed through her bones. The carriage lurched forward, and through the small window, she watched her home disappear behind her. The journey to Valdoria was long and miserable. The Valdorian guards were cold and formal. Her 3 maids, sweet girls who had served her for years, tried to keep her spirits up, but there was nothing to be done. She was traveling toward a prison disguised as a palace, and they all knew it. When they finally arrived, the Valdorian palace loomed before her, all cold stone and sharp angles. It was grand, certainly, perhaps even grander than her home, but it felt lifeless. Casimir met her at the entrance with courtly grace, offering his arm and escorting her through halls filled with watching courtiers. He showed her the palace, introduced her to key members of court, explained various protocols and expectations. He was perfectly polite, perfectly distant. She noticed that he never touched her beyond what was required for public appearances. When they retired for the evening, he did not come to her chambers. She was relieved but also confused. The first week passed in a haze of state dinners and formal presentations. Elara tried to be a good wife, a good princess. She smiled when expected, made polite conversation, learned the names and titles of the Valdorian nobility. The court was formal and watchful, every eye measuring her, judging her, finding her wanting in ways she did not yet understand. She felt constantly observed, constantly assessed, and she hated every moment of it. Then came the dinner that changed everything, a formal state occasion with all the highest nobility in attendance. Elara sat at the high table beside Casimir, wearing a gown of deep burgundy that the Valdorian court had selected for her. She was making polite conversation with a duchess about the upcoming hunting season when the doors to the dining hall opened with dramatic flair. A woman entered. She was stunning, with dark hair piled high in an elaborate arrangement, a gown of emerald silk that clung to every curve, and eyes that glittered with intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. She walked through the hall as though she owned it, and the court parted before her like water. Nobles bowed, ladies curtsied, and she acknowledged them with the barest nod as she made her way directly to the high table. Elara watched, confusion mounting, as this woman approached without hesitation, leaned down, and kissed Casimir full on the mouth in front of everyone. It was not a chaste kiss of greeting. It was possessive, intimate, the kiss of a lover. Elara froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips, shock rendering her speechless. She looked around wildly, expecting outrage, expecting someone to object to this flagrant breach of propriety. But the court barely reacted. A few knowing smiles, a scattered chuckle, whispers behind fans, no scandal, no shock. They had all known. Everyone had known except her. Casimir pulled back from the kiss with a slight smile, utterly unperturbed by his wife sitting inches away. "Lady Sovine, you are late. I was detained, my darling." Her voice was cultured, smooth as honey over poison. She finally glanced at Elara, as though noticing her for the first time, her eyes traveling over Elara's face and gown with obvious disdain. "Oh, the foreign princess. How quaint that you actually brought her to dinner. I assumed you would keep her locked away in her chambers where she belongs." The table erupted in polite laughter. Elara felt her cheeks burn. "Lady Sovine," Elara said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I do not believe we have been formally introduced. I am Princess Elara. I know precisely who you are, darling." Sovine took a seat at the high table, in the chair, immediately beside Casimir, that should have been reserved for the princess's lady-in-waiting or a visiting dignitary. No one objected. No one even blinked. "You are the peace offering, the desperate little girl whose father threw her at us to prevent a war. Tell me, how does it feel to be purchased like a mare at market?" Elara's breath caught. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, do not look so shocked. We all know the truth of this arrangement. Your kingdom was terrified of our military might, so they bought peace with you. A transaction, nothing more. One princess in exchange for our forbearance. Quite a bargain for them, really. We paid dearly for far less valuable breeding stock at the last horse fair." The nobles within earshot were watching avidly now, fans fluttering, faces bright with the anticipation of entertainment. Elara turned to Casimir, expecting him to defend her, to put an end to this outrageous behavior. But he was calmly cutting his meat, his expression utterly bored. "My lord," Elara said, her voice tight, "are you going to permit—" "Permit what?" Casimir finally looked at her, his eyes cold. "Lady Sovine to speak truthfully? I see no reason to stop her." Sovine smiled, a cat with a mouse. "You see, your highness, here in Valdoria we value honesty above false courtesies, and honestly, you are irrelevant. A signature on a treaty and nothing more. So do try not to make a spectacle of yourself. It is tedious." She turned her back on Elara and began an animated conversation with Casimir, laughing at something he whispered in her ear, her hand resting intimately on his arm. The rest of the dinner continued as though nothing had happened. Nobles talked and laughed around Elara, but none to her. She sat in silence, humiliation burning through her veins, pushing food around her plate because her throat had closed and she could not swallow. That night, Casimir finally came to Elara's chambers. She had been sitting at her vanity, staring at her reflection and wondering how her life had become this nightmare. When he entered without knocking, she stood, uncertain and afraid. "My lord, I did not expect—" "Sit down," he commanded, and she sat. He remained standing, looking down at her as one might look at a servant receiving instructions. Let us establish the terms of our arrangement so there shall be no confusion going forward. You are here because my father demanded I marry to secure the alliance. Very well. You will give me an heir eventually, when it becomes necessary for appearances. In exchange, you will have your title, your chambers, your comforts, but do not expect love, affection, or fidelity. I have Sovine for that. She is my partner in all the ways that matter. You are a political necessity, nothing more. Accept this reality, and we shall coexist peacefully enough. Fight it, and you will only make yourself miserable. Elara felt as though he had struck her. You truly intend to keep a mistress openly, while I am your wife? She is not my mistress, Casimir said sharply. She is my love. She is the woman I would have married had my father not demanded this alliance. You are the interloper, the obstacle placed between us by politics. Do not delude yourself into thinking you have any claim on my affections or loyalty. I am your wife, Elara said, her voice breaking. Before God and the church, I am your wife. You are a signature on a document. That is all you are. That is all you will ever be. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Do not write to your family complaining of your treatment. All correspondence is reviewed. Any letter that reflects poorly on Valdoria or our court will not be sent. You may write bland pleasantries about the weather and your health. Nothing more, do you understand? She understood. She was a prisoner. He left without waiting for a response. Elara sat frozen at her vanity for a long time after he departed, staring at her reflection and wondering if the woman looking back was truly herself or some hollow ghost wearing her face. The systematic humiliation began in earnest the following day. Elara descended to breakfast, hoping that perhaps the previous night had been an aberration. The breakfast room was filled with the highest-ranking ladies of the court, all taking their morning chocolate and discussing the latest gossip. When Elara entered, the conversation did not precisely stop, but it shifted in tone and volume in a way that made clear she was the subject. Lady Sovine sat at the head of the table, in the seat that should have belonged to Elara as the princess. She wore a magnificent necklace of rubies and diamonds that Elara recognized from her tour of the palace, the crown jewels reserved for the prince's wife. Sovine caught her staring and smiled. "Good morning, Your Highness. How kind of you to join us. We were just discussing the differences between our court and yours. Tell me, is it true that in your kingdom they permit anyone to dine with the royal family, even common merchants and tradesmen?" "We do not. That is not." Elara struggled to find her footing. "Our court observes all proper protocols and distinctions of rank." "How fascinating, because I have heard the most extraordinary stories about your father's court being quite lax in such matters. Democratic, one might even say." The way Sovine said democratic made it sound like a disease, but perhaps those are merely rumors spread by those who do not understand your quaint customs. The ladies tittered into their chocolate cups. Elara felt her face heating but forced herself to remain calm. "May I inquire, Lady Sovine, why you are wearing the crown jewels?" "I was under the impression those were reserved for the princess on formal occasions." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Sovine, then to Elara, then back again. Sovine set down her cup with deliberate care. "Oh, you sweet, ignorant child. These jewels are worn by the lady of the household, the woman who manages the palace, who commands the respect of the court, who holds actual power. That would be me. Darling, you are merely a title. I am the reality." She fingered the rubies at her throat. "Besides, they look far better on me than they ever would on you. Do you not agree, ladies?" A chorus of agreement rose from the assembled women. "Oh, absolutely. Lady Sovine has such elegance. The princess is quite simple in her tastes, is she not?" Elara's hands clenched in her lap. "Those jewels belong to the Princess of Valdoria by right and tradition." "Tradition?" Sovine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You dare speak to me of tradition when you come from a kingdom so desperate, so weak, that they sold their princess like a slave to buy peace? Your father bartered you away, Your Highness. You were the price of our mercy. So do not lecture me about rights and traditions when you have neither." Elara stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to hide, to escape this room full of cruel eyes and crueler tongues. But she was a princess. She had been raised to endure. So she drew herself up to her full height and met Sovine's gaze directly. "I shall take breakfast in my chambers," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Good day, ladies." She turned and walked from the room with as much dignity as she could muster. Behind her, she heard the explosion of laughter and voices, no longer bothering to be discreet. Did you see her face? How deliciously awkward. The poor thing actually thought she had authority here. In her chambers, Elara dismissed the Valdorian servants and allowed herself to weep, but the tears brought no relief. She was trapped in a palace full of enemies, married to a man who despised her, tormented by a woman who had made her suffering into entertainment, and there was no escape, no rescue, no hope. Then they came for her maids. Sweet Alice, who had braided Elara's hair since she was a child. Margaret, who always knew when Elara needed comforting and would bring her tea without being asked. And young Jane, barely 16, who sang while she worked and made even the darkest days brighter. They were Elara's only allies in this hostile place, the only people who showed her genuine affection and loyalty. They were framed for stealing and locked away. The weeks that followed became a blur of systematic degradation. The cruelty was everywhere, constant, inescapable. Even the servants treated her with barely concealed contempt. They would arrive late to dress her, forcing her to wait. They would forget items she requested, then look at her with blank faces when she mentioned it. "Forgive me, Your Highness, I must have misheard. You spoke so softly." They served her meals last at dinner, after everyone else had been served, letting her food grow cold. They cleaned her chambers poorly, leaving dust on surfaces and grime in corners, then acted surprised when she pointed it out. "Oh, Your Highness, we cleaned exactly as we always do. Perhaps your standards are simply different from ours." At court functions, nobles would turn away when she approached, suddenly finding something fascinating on the other side of the room. Conversations would stop when she entered, then resume in whispers after she passed. She heard the tribute whispered behind her back constantly now. Sometimes they did not even bother to whisper. Young lords would smirk openly when she walked by. Ladies would examine her gowns and hairstyles with pitying expressions, as though she were a child who had dressed herself poorly. The mockery was relentless and came from every direction. At a garden party, she overheard a duchess say to her companion, "I hear in her kingdom they consider it proper for ladies to read novels." Novels, as though fiction were suitable material for refined minds. At a musicale, when she ventured an opinion on the performance, a countess had smiled sweetly and said, "How charming that you have opinions, Your Highness." In Valdoria, we generally leave such assessments to those with proper musical education. At dinner one evening, when she had reached for the wrong fork, the gentleman beside her had loudly corrected her. "That is the fish fork, Your Highness. But then, I suppose at your father's table such distinctions are not observed." Each small cruelty was designed to remind her that she did not belong, that she was inferior, that she was tolerated only because treaty obligations demanded it. And through it all, Sovine reigned supreme, dripping with jewels that should have been Elara's, sitting in seats that should have been Elara's, holding Casimir's attention and affection while Elara was treated as an inconvenient piece of furniture. 2 months passed in this hell. Elara watched herself deteriorate in the mirror each morning. She grew thinner, her appetite destroyed by constant anxiety and the humiliation of being served last at every meal. Dark circles formed under her eyes from nights spent crying herself to sleep. Her gowns hung looser on her frame. The light in her eyes, the spirit that had once defined her, was fading like a candle burning down to nothing. She sat alone at dinners while the court laughed and talked around her as though she were invisible. She walked through corridors and conversations would stop, courtiers staring at her with open contempt before resuming their discussions. She attended balls where no one asked her to dance unless protocol absolutely demanded it, and then they made their reluctance painfully clear. She was a ghost haunting a palace where she was not wanted, slowly disappearing. Her only comfort came late at night, alone in her chambers after the Valdorian servants had finally left her in peace. She would go to her jewelry box, remove the false bottom she had created, and take out Kieran's silver insignia. She would hold it in her palm, trace the engraving with trembling fingers, and remember his voice. "Every day of my life, I am yours." She would whisper to it, as though he could somehow hear her across the miles that separated them. "I should have run away with you. I should have chosen love over duty. You were right. We should have fled that night. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." It was her only anchor to sanity, this small piece of silver that reminded her she had once been loved, once been valued, once been seen as something more than a political inconvenience. One evening, she realized with cold clarity that no one was coming to save her. Her letters home were being censored and blocked. Her family had no idea what was truly happening to her. They probably thought she was adjusting well, living a comfortable life as a princess in a grand palace. They did not know she was being systematically destroyed, her spirit crushed by 1,000 small cruelties until she would be nothing but an empty shell, useful only for producing an heir and maintaining the appearance of alliance. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted any chance of escape, she would have to save herself. The plan formed slowly over several days. She needed to get a message home, a real message that told the truth. But all official correspondence was monitored. She needed someone outside the normal channels, someone the censors would not think to watch. She began observing the servants more carefully. Most of them were loyal to Savine, reporting everything back to her mistress. But there was one, a kitchen boy named Thomas, who seemed different. He was young, perhaps 14, with kind eyes that reminded her of her younger brother. She had noticed that when the other servants mocked her, he looked uncomfortable. When they served her cold food or deliberately spilled things, he would glance away as though ashamed. He was not part of their cruelty. She began leaving her chambers more often, walking through parts of the palace she had not explored, always making sure her path took her past the kitchens. She would smile at Thomas when she saw him. She would say good morning to him when others were too proud to acknowledge a kitchen boy. Slowly, carefully, she cultivated his sympathy without being obvious about it. One afternoon, she found him alone in a corridor, carrying a heavy basket of vegetables. She stopped. "Thomas, is it not? That basket looks heavy. Shall I help you carry it?" He nearly dropped the basket in shock. "Your Highness." "No, I could not possibly. You should not." "Nonsense. I am quite capable of carrying vegetables." She took one handle of the basket, and together they walked toward the kitchens. "Tell me, Thomas, have you family in the city?" "Yes, Your Highness. My mother and 2 younger sisters. My father died last year. I am sorry for your loss. It must be difficult for your mother, raising 2 daughters alone." "It is, Your Highness. That is why I work here. The wages help support them." They reached the kitchens, and she released the basket. "You are a good son, Thomas. Your mother is fortunate to have you." Over the next week, she spoke to him whenever she could do so without drawing attention. She learned that his mother did washing for wealthy households, that his sisters were 8 and 10, that he dreamed of saving enough money to open a shop one day. She told him small things about her own life, carefully edited truths that made her seem less like an untouchable princess and more like a person. Then came the night she made her move. She had spent the afternoon composing 2 letters. One was bland and appropriate, asking her brother about the weather and his health, full of innocuous pleasantries that would pass any censor. But hidden within the seemingly innocent phrases was a cipher she and Hadrian had developed as children, a code they had used to pass secret messages during long, boring state functions. To anyone reading normally, the letter was harmless. But Hadrian would see the pattern, the way certain words were unnecessarily capitalized, the odd phrasing in specific sentences, the references to childhood memories that contained the key. When decoded, the real message would emerge. "I am not safe. The alliance is a lie. They mean to break me until I am useful only for bearing an heir. Then I will be discarded or worse. They plan war regardless. Help me, please. I am in a prison with crown molding." She waited until late evening, then walked through the palace until she found Thomas finishing his duties in the scullery. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Your Highness, is something wrong?" She glanced around to ensure they were alone, then moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Thomas, I need your help. I would not ask if I were not desperate." His eyes widened. "I do not understand, Your Highness." She pulled a letter from her sleeve, along with her mother's pearl earrings, valuable but not so conspicuous that they would be immediately missed. I need this letter delivered to my family, not through official channels. Those are all monitored. I need you to find a merchant traveling to my homeland and pay him to deliver this directly to Prince Hadrian. No intermediaries, no palace officials, just merchant to prince. Thomas stared at the earrings, clearly understanding their value. Your Highness, if I am caught, I know what I am asking. I know the risk, but Thomas, I am drowning here. No one knows what is truly happening to me. This letter might be my only chance. Tears welled in her eyes, genuine and desperate. Please, I will give you more if you succeed. I will ensure your family is taken care of. But please, help me. You are the only person in this entire palace who has shown me any kindness. He looked at her for a long moment, seeing her distress, her desperation. Finally, he took the letter and the earrings, tucking them carefully into his shirt. I will try, Your Highness. My mother knows a merchant who trades across the border. I will get this to him tomorrow. I swear it. She caught his hand, squeezed it gratefully. Thank you. You cannot know what this means to me. He left quickly, and she returned to her chambers, her heart pounding with hope and terror in equal measure. The letter was away. Now all she could do was wait and pray that it reached Hadrian, that he would decode it, that he would believe her, that he would act. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Kieran was dying inside. He had become a dead man walking since Elara left. He volunteered for every dangerous assignment, every night watch, every brutal detail that other guards avoided. He trained until his body screamed, accepting any distraction from the constant ache in his chest. He barely ate. He did not sleep. When he did sleep, he dreamed of her, and waking was agony. The other guards noticed. They whispered among themselves, worried about their brother-in-arms who seemed determined to destroy himself through exhaustion and recklessness. The captain of the guard mentioned it to the king. The king summoned Kieran to his private study one afternoon. Kieran entered and bowed correctly, his face carefully blank. You wish to see me, Your Majesty? The king studied him with concerned eyes. You were always my daughter's most dedicated protector, Kieran. But lately, you seem troubled. Grief-stricken, even. Is something wrong? Kieran could not tell him the truth, could not say that he was grieving the woman he loved, who was alive but lost to him forever. I miss having a purpose, Your Majesty. Guarding Princess Elara gave my life meaning. Now I feel adrift, without direction. The king looked at him thoughtfully, as though seeing something he had not noticed before. But he said nothing more, simply dismissed Kieran with instructions to take better care of himself. 3 weeks after Elara sent her letter, it arrived at the palace. A merchant delivered it to Prince Hadrian personally, explaining that a boy had paid him handsomely to ensure it reached the prince directly. Hadrian recognized his sister's handwriting immediately and tore it open eagerly. He read it once, seeing only pleasantries and questions about the weather. He frowned, confused. This did not sound like Elara. The phrasing was odd, stilted in places. Then he noticed the capital letters in strange places. Dear brother, capitalized mid-sentence. The, capitalized when it should not be. References to childhood games they had played. And suddenly, he remembered. The cipher. They had created it when they were children. A game to pass secret messages during boring functions. He spent an hour decoding it, his hands shaking as the real message emerged. When he finally understood what his sister was saying, his face went pale. He read it again to be certain, then again. Then he ran to find their father. The king was in conference with advisors, but Hadrian burst in without ceremony. Father, I must speak with you. Privately. Now. The king saw his son's face and dismissed the advisors immediately. When they were alone, Hadrian handed him the decoded message. The king read it, his hands beginning to shake. My daughter, he whispered. They are torturing her, humiliating her. We must act, Hadrian said urgently. We must bring her home. How? She is Casimir's wife under Valdorian law. Any military action would start the very war we married her to prevent. Then what do we do? Leave her there to suffer? The king called an emergency council meeting. The highest advisors gathered, along with the captain of the guard, who brought Kieran since he had been Elara's personal protector and might have relevant insights. They assembled in the council chamber, and the king read Elara's decoded letter aloud. Kieran's hands clenched into fists as he heard what she was enduring, his jaw locked so tightly it could have cracked stone. Every word was a knife in his chest. The advisors began discussing options, and they were all terrible. We have a signed treaty. Your Majesty, Princess Elara is legally Valdorian property under their laws. Any military action would be seen as breaking the treaty and would justify the war we sought to avoid. We cannot risk thousands of lives for one person, even a princess. The king slumped in his chair, aged and broken. My hands are tied. Elara is under Valdorian law now. If I send soldiers, I start a war. If she suffers there, if she even perishes there, it is her sacrifice for her country. She understood the duty she accepted when she married. Silence fell over the room. The king was crying as he spoke, but he spoke the words nonetheless. Then Kieran's voice cut through the silence, low and shaking with barely controlled rage. No. Every head turned to stare at him. A guard did not say no to a king. With respect, Your Majesty, no. She did not accept anything. She was forced. She begged you not to send her. I was there. I heard her crying. I held her while she wept. And now you will abandon her? Leave her in that hell to be broken and degraded until she is useful only for breeding an heir? The king's eyes widened. You forget yourself, guardsman. I forget nothing. Kieran was standing now, propriety shattered, 5 years of suppressed emotion exploding outward. I remember every tear, she cried. I remember how she pleaded with you. I remember standing there watching her marry a man she did not love because you demanded it, because of duty. And now that same duty requires you to do nothing while she suffers? Hadrian tried to intervene. Kieran, please. But Kieran was beyond stopping, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. I will not have it. I will not abandon her. I will bring her back myself if I have to cross hell to do it. I swear it before this council, before God himself. I will save her or die trying. The king stared at him, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the anguish in Kieran's eyes, the love burning there, the way his entire body trembled with the need to act. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. You love her, the king said quietly. All this time, you are the one she spoke of, the one she said she loved. Kieran did not deny it, did not drop his gaze. Every day of my life, Your Majesty, I am hers. I have always been hers. The king's grief transformed into fury, not at Valdoria now, but at Kieran, at this impossible situation. You dare? You dare love my daughter? A blacksmith's son and a princess? And now you challenge me, threaten to start an international incident out of lovesick foolishness? He turned to the guards at the door. Arrest him. Lock him in the dungeons. He will cool his head there while I decide whether this constitutes treason. Guards moved forward to seize Kieran. He did not resist, allowing them to take his weapons, to bind his hands. But as they led him toward the door, he looked back at the king one final time. Keep me locked away forever if you wish, Your Majesty. Hang me for treason if it pleases you. It changes nothing. Someone must save her, and if you will not do it, then I will. The door closed behind him, and he was gone. The dungeons beneath the palace were cold and damp, the stone walls weeping moisture that never dried. Kieran sat on the narrow cot in his cell, his mind racing despite the chill that seeped into his bones. They had taken his sword, his dagger, even the small knife he kept in his boot, but they could not take his knowledge of this palace, every secret passage and hidden corridor he had learned during 5 years of guarding Elara. The window in his cell was small, barely wider than his hand, but through it he could see the night sky. He knew the guard rotations by heart, knew that the dungeons were considered secure enough that they posted only 2 guards at the main entrance, and those guards changed every 4 hours. Knew that the lock on his cell was old, the mechanism worn from decades of use. He had picked locks before, during his training. All he needed was something thin and sturdy enough to work the tumblers. He searched his cell methodically, running his hands over every stone, every crack. In the corner, where the wall met the floor, he found what he needed. A nail, long and thick, probably dropped by a workman years ago and forgotten. He worked it free from the mortar, then bent it carefully until it formed the shape he required. Hours passed. He worked the lock with patient precision, feeling for each tumbler, listening for the soft click that meant he was making progress. His fingers cramped, sweat dripped into his eyes despite the cold, but he did not stop. Elara was suffering. Elara needed him. That was all that mattered. The lock finally gave with a soft snick that sounded thunderous in the silence. Kieran froze, listening. No alarm, no footsteps. He eased the cell door open and slipped into the corridor beyond. The dungeons were a maze, but he knew them. He moved like a shadow, barefoot and silent, staying close to the walls where the darkness was deepest. He could hear the two guards at the main entrance, their voices low and bored. He needed a different exit. There was a drainage tunnel, he remembered, used to channel water away from the lower levels during heavy rains. It had an iron grate, but the hinges were rusted. If he could reach it, he might be able to force it open. He moved deeper into the dungeons, past empty cells and stored equipment, until he found the tunnel entrance. The grate was exactly as he remembered, corroded and weak. He braced his feet against the wall and pulled. The metal groaned softly. He pulled harder, muscles straining, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. The grate gave way suddenly, nearly sending him sprawling. He caught himself, listened for any sign he had been heard. Nothing. The tunnel was narrow and foul-smelling, filled with stagnant water that soaked him to the waist. He crawled through it, the walls pressing close on either side, until finally he emerged into open air near the palace's outer wall. He was free. But he was also unarmed, on foot, and hundreds of miles from Valdoria. He needed a horse, supplies, and he needed them without raising an alarm. The East Stable was his best option. It housed the messenger horses, kept ready for urgent dispatches. Security there was lighter than at the main stables. He made his way through the palace grounds, using every shadow, every blind spot he knew. Guards patrolled, but he had trained alongside these men. He knew how they moved, where they looked, where they did not. The stable was dark and quiet when he reached it. He found a strong gelding, black as the night around them, and led it from its stall. There were saddlebags already prepared, as was standard for messenger horses. He checked them quickly, found provisions, water, even a small purse of coins. It would have to be enough. He was leading the horse toward the stable door when a voice spoke from the shadows. "Going somewhere, Kieran?" He spun, hand reaching instinctively for a weapon he did not have. Then Prince Hadrian stepped into the lamplight, and Kieran's heart nearly stopped. "Your Highness, You were escaping. Quite cleverly, I might add." Hadrian moved closer, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "My sister spoke of you once. Did you know? When we were children, after you had joined the guard. She said you were the only man who ever saw her as herself, not as a princess, not as a title or a political piece, just as Elara. She was right to love you." Kieran stared at him, confusion and hope warring in his chest. "My lord, if you are here to stop me, I am here to help you." Hadrian produced a key and held it out. "The guard rotation changes in 10 minutes. There is a better horse in the fourth stall, faster and with more endurance for a long journey. The provisions in those saddlebags have been supplemented. There are maps, money, and a letter bearing my seal that will grant you passage through our border checkpoints." Kieran took the key with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone should fight for her, because love matters more than treaties, because my father is wrong, and I cannot stand by while my sister suffers." Hadrian's voice was fierce. "The route through the mountain pass is fastest, but dangerous. You will make it in 3 days if you push hard. Do you have a plan once you reach Valdoria?" "I will find a way inside the palace. I will bring her home." "Good. I was never here, Kieran. You escaped on your own. And Kieran?" Hadrian gripped his shoulder. "Bring my sister home, whatever it takes." 10 minutes later, Kieran was riding through the palace gates on the fastest horse in the royal stables, the night swallowing him whole. Behind him, an alarm would soon sound. Guards would search, but by then he would be miles away, and nothing would stop him from reaching Elara. The journey was brutal. He rode through day and night, stopping only when the horse absolutely needed rest. He pushed through mountain passes where the wind cut like knives, forded rivers swollen with spring melt, navigated forests thick with undergrowth. His body screamed for rest. His shoulder, still healing from old training injuries, ached with every movement. But he did not stop, could not stop. He thought of Elara constantly, wondered if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if they were still tormenting her. He thought of her holding his insignia in the darkness, whispering his name. The image drove him forward, when exhaustion threatened to pull him from the saddle. On the third day, he crested a hill and saw the Valdorian capital spread before him, the palace rising above the city like a crown of stone. He had made it. Now came the truly dangerous part. He spent a day observing the palace from a distance, studying the guard patterns, the shift changes, the weak points in their security. They were good, well-trained, but no security was perfect. Everyone had blind spots. He needed a way inside that would not draw immediate attention, a disguise. He watched the city, looking for an opportunity, and found it late one evening. A Valdorian guard stumbling out of a tavern, drunk and alone, taking a shortcut through a dark alley. Kieran followed silently. The fight was brief and brutal. The guard never had a chance. Kieran stripped him of his uniform, his identification, everything that would allow him to pass as one of them. He left the man tied and gagged in the alley, alive but unable to raise an alarm for several hours. The next morning, clean-shaven and wearing the stolen uniform, Kieran joined the guard shift change. His heart pounded as he passed through security checkpoints, but his stolen credentials were accepted without question. The uniforms were similar enough to his own kingdom's that he knew how to wear it, how to stand, how to move like a soldier. He was inside. He spent the next 2 days playing his role perfectly, memorizing the palace layout, learning routines, discovering where Elara's chambers were located. He saw her from a distance once, at a formal luncheon, and it took every ounce of his control not to run to her immediately. She looked so thin, so pale, her eyes haunted, but she was alive. She was here. And soon he would take her away from this place. He learned that Prince Casimir would be dining at Lady Sovine's estate the following evening, outside the palace grounds. The princess would be alone, guarded but accessible. It was his chance. That night, he made his way through the palace corridors with the confidence of a guard who belonged there. He had memorized the route to Elara's chambers, knew which corridors would be empty at this hour. His heart raced as he approached her door. He picked the lock with practiced ease and slipped inside. The room was lit by a single candle. Elara stood at the window in her nightgown and robe, her back to him, something small clutched in her hands. His insignia. She was holding his insignia, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. "Elara," he whispered. She spun around, her face going white with shock. The insignia fell from her hands, clattering on the floor. "Kieran?" Her voice broke on his name. "No, I am dreaming. I must be dreaming. You cannot be here. I am here." He moved toward her slowly, afraid she might faint. "I came for you. I told you. Every day of my life, I am yours." She ran to him then, and he caught her, holding her so tightly he feared he might break her. She was sobbing against his chest, her hands clutching his stolen uniform, her entire body shaking. "I never thought," she gasped between sobs. "I did not think anyone would come. I thought I would die here, alone, forgotten. Never. I will never forget you. I will never abandon you." He pulled back just enough to see her face, his hands framing it, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "We are leaving. Tonight, if possible, tomorrow at the latest." "They watch me constantly," she said, fear creeping into her voice. "The servants report everything. My maids were taken away. I cannot take a step without someone noting it." "I know. I have been here 2 days planning. But Elara, you must trust me. Can you do that? With my life. With everything I am." "Good. Listen carefully. Tomorrow night there is a state ball. Everyone will be distracted. I will position myself near the servants' staircase on the east wing. When you excuse yourself, saying you are unwell, go to your chambers. Change into riding clothes. Take only what you can carry easily. Meet me at the staircase exactly 1 hour after you leave the ballroom. Can you remember that?" "Yes, 1 hour. The east wing servants' staircase. We will move quickly once we are together. I have horses waiting outside the city walls. We will ride hard for the coast. There is a ship. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Voices. The prince has returned early. He is coming to Her Highness's chambers." Panic flashed across both their faces. Casimir was back, unexpectedly, and he was coming here. Now. "Hide," Elara hissed. "The wardrobe, quickly." Kieran looked around frantically, then ran to the large wardrobe against the wall. He squeezed inside among her gowns, pulling the door nearly closed, just as the chamber door opened. Through the crack, he watched Casimir enter, his face dark with anger. Elara stood by her vanity, trying desperately to look natural, to control her breathing. "My lord," she said, her voice only slightly tremulous, "I did not expect you this evening. Sovine and I had a disagreement." Casimir looked around the room with narrowed eyes. "I thought I would spend the evening here instead. Have you had any visitors?" Inside the wardrobe, Kieran's hand moved to the dagger he had stolen from the guard. If Casimir opened this door, he would have to fight. He would kill the prince if necessary, damn the consequences. "No, my lord," Elara said, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I have been alone all evening, as always." Casimir walked slowly around the room, examining things, his gaze suspicious. He approached the wardrobe, his hand reaching for the door. Kieran tensed, ready to spring. "My lord," Elara said quickly, desperately, "if you are staying, shall I call for wine? Or perhaps you would prefer to retire for the night?" Casimir paused, his hand on the wardrobe door. Inside, Kieran's fingers tightened on his dagger. Then Casimir turned away with a sound of disgust. "No, I have changed my mind. This room depresses me. Your constant misery is tiresome." He left as abruptly as he had arrived, the door slamming behind him. They waited in frozen silence for a full minute, neither daring to breathe. Finally, Kieran emerged from the wardrobe, and they both sagged with relief. "That was too close," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Tomorrow night," Elara said urgently. "We cannot risk another encounter. Tomorrow night at the ball, 1 hour after I leave. I will be ready." He pulled her close one more time, kissed her desperately. "Tomorrow night. Be ready. And Elara, do not bring much. We will be moving fast. And we cannot be weighed down. I need nothing but you." He slipped out of her chambers as silently as he had entered, his heart still racing from how close they had come to discovery. Tomorrow night they would be free. The next evening, the state ball was exactly the distraction they needed. The palace blazed with light and music. Elara attended in a gown of deep blue, playing her role one final time. She endured Sovine's presence at the high table, endured Casimir's cold indifference, endured the court's barely concealed contempt. But tonight, she endured it with hope singing in her veins. Kieran stood with the other guards lining the ballroom, his eyes tracking her every movement. He saw how thin she had become, how the light had dimmed in her eyes. Rage burned in his chest, but he controlled it. Soon, very soon. Near midnight, Elara stood and addressed Casimir quietly. "My lord, I am feeling unwell. Might I retire?" Casimir barely glanced at her. "Do as you wish." She walked from the ballroom with measured steps, though every instinct screamed at her to run. She climbed the stairs to her chambers, her heart pounding. Once inside, she tore off the ball gown and changed into riding clothes she had hidden at the back of her wardrobe. She grabbed a small bag, threw in only essentials. Kieran's insignia went into her pocket, against her heart where it belonged. 1 hour. She had to wait 1 hour to avoid suspicion. It was the longest hour of her life. Finally, when she could bear it no longer, she slipped from her chambers and made her way to the East Wing servants' staircase. Kieran was already there, still in his guard uniform. When he saw her, relief flooded his face. "Ready?" "More than ready." They moved through the palace together, using servants' passages and back corridors that Kieran had mapped over the past days. They had several close calls, hiding in alcoves when servants passed, pressing themselves against walls when guards rounded corners. But Kieran knew every blind spot, every moment when patrols overlapped and created gaps in coverage. They made it out of the palace and through the city streets without raising an alarm. The horses Kieran had prepared were exactly where he had left them, hidden in a small copse outside the city walls. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I grew up on horseback." They mounted and rode hard into the darkness, the city falling away behind them. Elara looked back once at the palace that had been her prison and felt nothing but relief as it disappeared from view. They rode through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Valdoria. Dawn was breaking when Kieran finally slowed their pace slightly. "How far to the coast?" Elara asked. "If we keep this pace, we will reach it by tomorrow evening. There is a ship waiting." Behind them, in the distance, they heard it. The sound of horses, many horses, moving fast. "They have discovered we are gone," Kieran said grimly. "Ride, Elara, ride as fast as you can." They urged their horses into a gallop, racing across open countryside, through forests, over streams. But the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Their horses were fast, but they had been traveling all night. The pursuers were fresh. "There!" Elara cried, pointing ahead. "I can see the ocean." The coastline spread before them, beautiful and tantalizingly close. A ship waited in the harbor below, exactly as promised. They crested a hill, so close to freedom they could taste it. Then riders appeared from both sides, cutting off their path to the harbor. Valdorian soldiers, at least 20 of them, surrounding them in a semicircle. Kieran and Elara pulled their horses to a halt, trapped. Prince Casimir rode forward from the center of the formation, his face twisted with rage and wounded pride. Behind him, looking satisfied, was Lady Sovine. "Get down from the horses," Casimir commanded, his voice cold as winter. "Now." Kieran drew his sword, the blade singing as it left the scabbard. "Stay behind me," he said to Elara, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. "Kieran, there are too many, I know, but I will not let them take you back. Not without a fight." Casimir dismounted slowly, drawing his own blade with deliberate menace. How touching. The lovesick guard playing hero. "Did you truly think you could steal my wife and escape without consequence?" "She was never yours," Kieran said, positioning himself between Elara and the soldiers. "You treated her like property, like something purchased and owned. She deserves better than that. She deserves better than you. What she deserves is irrelevant. She is mine by law, by treaty, by every measure that matters." Casimir's eyes were cold, calculating. "Surrender now, and I might let you die quickly. Resist, and I will make you watch while I drag her back to the palace in chains." Kieran's answer was to raise his sword higher. "Come and try." The Valdorian soldiers moved forward, weapons drawn. Kieran knew this was likely his last stand. 20 trained soldiers against one exhausted guard. But he would make them remember this fight. He would make them pay dearly for every inch of ground. The first soldier charged, and Kieran met him with a strike that sent the man reeling backward. 2 more came from the sides, and he spun, parrying one blade while kicking the other soldier in the chest. He was fighting with desperate ferocity, every skill he had ever learned pouring into this moment. Behind him, Elara had dismounted and picked up a fallen branch, wielding it like a club. When a soldier tried to circle around Kieran, she struck him hard across the head, and he went down. "I will not be a helpless observer," she shouted. Kieran fought like a man possessed, his blade a silver blur in the morning light. But there were too many. A sword caught him across the shoulder, reopening an old wound. Blood soaked through his stolen uniform, but he did not stop, could not stop. An arrow flew past his ear, another grazed his thigh. Still he fought. They overwhelmed him finally through sheer numbers, bearing him to the ground beneath the weight of armored bodies. They disarmed him, pinned him, forced him to his knees. Elara screamed, trying to run to him, but guards caught her arms and held her fast. Casimir approached slowly, savoring his victory. He removed Kieran's helmet, examining his face with cold satisfaction. "I knew it. I knew I recognized you. You were her guard during the courtship. I remember now, the way you watched her, the way she looked at you when she thought no one noticed." He turned to Elara, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have been in love with him all along, and he with you. How deliciously pathetic. The princess and the common guard, star-crossed lovers in a tragedy of your own making." Elara struggled against the hands restraining her. "Let him go. Please, Casimir, I beg you. This is between you and me. He was only trying to help me escape a situation that was destroying me." "Oh, I understand perfectly what he was doing." Casimir drew his sword and stood over Kieran, the blade gleaming in the dawn light. "Hold her. Make certain she watches every moment of this." The guards forced Elara's head up, made her look, prevented her from turning away. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Casimir raise his sword above Kieran's head. "Please," she sobbed. "Casimir, please. I will do anything. I will return willingly. I will never attempt to leave again. I will be whatever you need me to be. Just do not kill him. Please." "You need to understand the consequences of betrayal," Casimir said coldly. "You need to learn what happens when you humiliate me, when you run off with a common soldier like some tavern wench. Watch the man you love die, knowing it is your fault, knowing your foolish choices brought him to this end." Kieran, wounded and bleeding, looked at Elara one final time. His voice was hoarse but clear. "I do not regret it, any of it. I love you, Elara. I will always love you." Casimir's face twisted with rage. How touching. "Goodbye, guardsman." He raised the sword higher, muscles tensing for the killing blow. Elara screamed, a sound of pure anguish that tore through the morning air. The arrow came from nowhere, a streak of silver in the dawn light. It struck Casimir's blade with a metallic clang, deflecting the sword from its downward arc. Everyone froze, confusion rippling through the Valdorian soldiers. From the hills above came the thunder of hoofbeats. Riders appeared, dozens of them, carrying torches and banners that bore the crest of Elara's kingdom. They poured down the hillside like an avalanche, surrounding the Valdorian forces. A voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I suggest you lower your weapon, Prince Casimir." Prince Hadrian rode to the front of his forces, magnificent on a white stallion, his sword drawn and his eyes blazing with righteous fury. Behind him rode over 100 of the finest soldiers in the kingdom, all armed and ready for battle. Casimir's soldiers tensed, hands moving to weapons, but they were suddenly outnumbered. Hadrian's forces had them surrounded completely. "Release my sister and the guardsmen," Hadrian commanded. "Now." Casimir's face was purple with rage. "You have no authority here, Prince Hadrian. This is Valdorian soil. Your sister is my wife under our laws. This man is a criminal who helped her escape lawful custody. And you, Prince Casimir, have committed acts of war against our kingdom." Hadrian reached into his saddlebag and pulled out documents, holding them high for all to see. "Your war plans, your invasion maps, your council minutes discussing how the marriage was merely a distraction while you prepared to attack us. I have proof, signed and sealed by your own generals, that you never intended to honor the peace treaty." Elara's eyes widened. She looked at Kieran, who met her gaze. He had not told her, had not mentioned finding those documents. Hadrian continued, his voice carrying across the assembled forces. "Some days ago, these documents were delivered to me by a trusted messenger. They detail your military preparations, your planned invasion routes, your strategies for conquering our kingdom. Kieran discovered them during his time in your palace and ensured they reached me." The revelation hung in the air like thunder. Casimir's face went from purple to white. "You broke the treaty long before my sister attempted to leave," Hadrian said. "You violated every term by acting in bad faith, by using the marriage as a cover while planning war. The alliance is void. Elara owes you nothing." "Those documents are lies," Casimir sputtered. "Fabrications. They bear your council's seals, your general's signatures. The evidence is irrefutable." Hadrian's voice hardened. "Now release them both, or we will take them by force." For a long moment, no one moved. The two forces faced each other, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Casimir made his decision. "Attack!" he screamed. "Kill them all!" The Valdorian soldiers hesitated, looking between their prince and the superior force surrounding them. But Casimir's pride would not allow retreat. He charged at Hadrian himself, his sword raised. What followed was brief but brutal. Hadrian's forces engaged the Valdorian soldiers with disciplined precision. Steel rang against steel. Men shouted and fell. Kieran, even wounded, managed to grab a fallen sword and fight alongside his rescuers. The guards holding Elara released her to join the battle, and she immediately ran to Kieran's side. Hadrian met Casimir's charge, their blades clashing with tremendous force. They fought across the hillside, Casimir driven by wounded pride and rage, Hadrian fighting with cold determination to protect his sister. "You took her from us," Hadrian said through gritted teeth, blocking a vicious strike. You tortured her. You broke her spirit for your own amusement. She was mine to do with as I pleased, Casimir snarled. She was never yours. She is a person, not property. Their blades locked, faces inches apart. Then Hadrian twisted, using Casimir's momentum against him, and sent the Valdorian prince sprawling to the ground. He stood over him, sword at his throat. "Yield," Hadrian commanded. Around them, the battle was ending. The Valdorian soldiers, seeing their prince defeated and outnumbered, were throwing down their weapons. It was over. Casimir glared up at Hadrian with pure hatred. "This means war. My father will not let this insult stand. Your father will have no choice," Hadrian said coldly. "When we present these documents to the assembled courts of England, when we reveal how you violated the treaty terms, how you planned invasion while hiding behind a marriage alliance, your kingdom will face consequences far worse than war. Sanctions, isolation, disgrace." He stepped back, lowering his sword but keeping it ready. "Consider yourself fortunate I do not kill you where you lie, but my sister has suffered enough, and I will not make her watch more bloodshed." Hadrian's soldiers moved to secure the Valdorian forces. Kieran, bleeding from multiple wounds, stumbled toward Elara. She caught him as his legs gave out, lowering him gently to the ground. "You found evidence," she whispered. "You sent it to Hadrian. You planned for this." "I could not risk just the two of us," he said, his voice weak. "And I could not let them get away with what they did to you, what they planned to do to your kingdom." Hadrian knelt beside them, his expression softening as he looked at his sister. "Are you hurt?" "No, frightened, exhausted, but not hurt." She looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "You came for me. You actually came. Did you think I would not? You are my sister." He glanced at Kieran. "And he was willing to die for you. That kind of love deserves fighting for." They helped Kieran to his feet, supporting him between them. "We have a ship waiting," Hadrian said. "We need to leave before Casimir's reinforcements arrive." Behind them, Casimir was screaming threats and promises of vengeance, but no one paid him attention. Hadrian's forces created a protective cordon as they made their way down to the harbor. The ship was exactly where it should be, crew ready and waiting. As they boarded, Elara looked back one final time at the Valdorian coastline. Casimir stood on the hill, a small figure against the rising sun, still shouting curses. She felt nothing. No fear, no regret, only relief that she was finally free. On the ship, Elara tended to Kieran's wounds while Hadrian gave orders to the captain. The arrow wound in his shoulder was deep but clean. The sword cut on his thigh would leave a scar, but he would live. "You took terrible risks," she said softly, binding his shoulder with strips of cloth. "You could have been killed a dozen times. You were suffering. What else could I do? You could have stayed safe at home." "There is no safety without you. No home without you." He caught her hand. "I meant what I said before Casimir tried to kill me. I do not regret any of it." Hadrian joined them, carrying wine. "You both should drink. It will help with the shock." They sat together as the ship pulled away from the Valdorian harbor, watching the coastline recede. Hadrian explained everything, how the documents had arrived, how he had convinced their father that war was inevitable regardless, how they had mobilized forces in secret and followed Kieran's trail. "Father wanted to come himself," Hadrian said, "but his advisors convinced him it would be seen as an act of war if the king personally led a rescue mission into Valdorian territory. So he sent me instead, with his blessing and his forces." "What happens now?" Elara asked. "Casimir was right about one thing. This will mean war." "Perhaps, but we have the evidence of their treachery. Every noble house in England will see it. Valdoria will be isolated, their reputation destroyed. They may choose war, but they will fight it alone, without allies." Hadrian smiled grimly. "And with the intelligence Kieran provided about their troop positions and strategies, we have a significant advantage." The journey home took 4 days. Elara spent most of it caring for Kieran, making sure his wounds healed properly, sleeping beside him when exhaustion finally claimed them both. They talked for hours, making plans, dreaming impossible dreams that suddenly seemed possible. When their ship finally docked at home, the entire court was waiting. The king stood at the head of the dock, and when Elara descended the gangplank, he ran to her like a common man, crushing her in his embrace. "My daughter," he sobbed, "my precious daughter, I am so sorry. I am so terribly sorry for what I did to you. You were trying to save lives, father. I understand. I almost lost you. I almost destroyed you to save a peace that was never real." He pulled back to look at her face. "Can you ever forgive me? There is nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was right." The king turned to Kieran, who had descended the gangplank with Hadrian's support. "And you saved her twice now, once from assassins, once from a prison of my making. You uncovered the treachery that would have left us unprepared for invasion." He removed his signet ring, the symbol of his authority. "Kneel, if you are able." Kieran, confused, slowly lowered himself to one knee, wincing at the pain in his wounded leg. The king drew his ceremonial sword and tapped it gently on each of Kieran's shoulders. "I name you Lord Kieran of Westmarch, with lands and title commensurate with your service to the crown. You are a hero of the realm, a savior of the kingdom, and you have proven yourself worthy of the highest honors we can bestow." The assembled court murmured in surprise and approval. The king helped Kieran stand. "It is not a prince's title," the king said quietly, "but it is enough that your marriage to my daughter will not be a scandal. It is enough that you may wed with honor and dignity." Elara's breath caught. "Father, do you mean—" "Marry him, with my blessing and my gratitude." "You were right, daughter. Duty without love is just cruelty. I should have listened to you from the beginning." The queen stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I told you your feelings would pass, that you would forget him. I was so terribly wrong. Can you forgive me?" Elara embraced her mother. "There is nothing to forgive. You were trying to protect me in the only way you knew how." 3 weeks later, in the palace gardens where this story truly began, Elara and Kieran were married. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the nightmare spectacle in Valdoria. Just family, close friends, and the guards who had served alongside Kieran for years. Elara wore a simple gown of cream silk, flowers in her hair instead of jewels. Kieran wore the formal attire of his new station as Lord of Westmarch, his wounds nearly healed, his eyes bright with joy. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, standing in the morning sunlight with the whole kingdom spread before them. "I, Elara, choose you, Kieran," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Not because I must, but because I cannot choose anyone else. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I was treated as worthless. You risked everything to save me when I had lost all hope. You are my heart, my home, my everything." "I, Kieran, choose you, Elara," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I have chosen you every day since I met you. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. You are worth every risk, every battle, every impossible odd. Loving you has been the greatest honor of my life." When they kissed, the small gathering erupted in cheers. The king wiped tears from his eyes. The queen sobbed openly. Hadrian grinned and raised his glass in salute. The celebration that followed was joyous and genuine. They danced in the gardens, ate simple but delicious food, laughed, and talked until the stars came out. For the first time in months, Elara felt truly, completely happy. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, the king drew Kieran aside. "You know war is coming. I know, your majesty. Casimir will not let this stand. Can we win? With the intelligence I gathered about their forces and strategies, yes. We have a significant advantage, and with the evidence of their treachery now public knowledge, they will fight without allies. It will be difficult, but we can win. Will you fight beside me? I know you have just been married, and asking you to go to war seems cruel. I will fight," Kieran said without hesitation. "For her, for our home, for everything we have built." The king gripped his shoulder. "Then we face it together, son." Much later, after the guests had departed and the palace had grown quiet, Kieran and Elara stood on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. His arms were around her, her hand resting over his heart where his insignia, returned to him, sat pinned to his coat. In the distance, faint on the night wind, they could hear the sound of army camps mobilizing, war drums beating softly. soldiers preparing for the conflict that was surely coming. "Are you afraid?" Elara asked softly. "Of war? Yes. Of losing you? Terrified." He tightened his arms around her. "But we are together now. That is what matters. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together. Always." They stood watching the stars, holding each other, two people who had found love in impossible circumstances and fought against all odds to keep it. The future was uncertain. War loomed on the horizon. But they had each other, and that made them stronger than any army, more powerful than any king. Love, they had learned, was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth every battle, every scar, every impossible choice, because a life without love was no life at all. And a love worth having was a love worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of pain. They had found that love. They had fought for it. And now, finally, it was truly theirs. 6 months later, the war with Valdoria ended in decisive victory for Elara's kingdom. The evidence of Casimir's treachery had isolated Valdoria completely, and without allies, they could not sustain a prolonged conflict. Casimir himself fell in battle, and his father, the king, sued for peace, agreeing to terms that ensured Valdoria would never threaten their neighbors again. Kieran distinguished himself in battle, his tactical knowledge and personal bravery earning him the respect of every soldier who fought beside him. He returned home a hero, covered in new scars but alive and whole. Elara and Kieran's story reminds us that sometimes the hardest choices require the most courage. Elara could have stayed silent, accepted her suffering as the price of duty, and slowly disappeared into misery. Instead, she found a way to cry for help, risking everything on the hope that someone still cared. That single act of courage, writing that hidden message, set everything else in motion. Kieran showed us that true love is not passive. It does not sit quietly while the person you love suffers. It acts, even when the odds seem impossible, even when everyone says there is no hope. He could have accepted the king's imprisonment, could have told himself that rescuing Elara was impossible. Instead, he chose to fight, to risk his life, to cross enemy territory alone because love demanded action, not resignation. And perhaps most importantly, their story teaches us that some promises are worth breaking. The treaty that bound Elara to Casimir was built on lies and deception. Sometimes, what looks like duty is actually just another form of cruelty. Sometimes, the honorable thing is not to keep suffering in silence, but to expose the truth, no matter how inconvenient that truth might be. Prince Hadrian understood this. He could have obeyed his father, could have left his sister to her fate, because interfering might start a war. Instead, he chose to act on what was right rather than what was convenient. He helped Kieran escape. He mobilized forces in secret. He risked everything because family and justice mattered more than political calculations. Even the king learned and grew. He made a terrible mistake, forcing his daughter into a marriage that nearly destroyed her. But when confronted with the truth, when he finally understood what his decision had cost, he had the humility to admit he was wrong. He did not hide behind royal pride or political necessity. He apologized, he made amends, and he gave his blessing to the love he should have recognized from the beginning. Their story was not easy. It was filled with pain, separation, suffering, and near death. But it was real. And in the end, that reality, that willingness to fight for what truly mattered, created something far stronger than any political alliance ever could. Thank you so much for joining me on Elara and Kieran's journey. I hope their story moved you, inspired you, maybe even made you think about the choices in your own life. Where are you watching this from? Have you ever had to choose between duty and what your heart wanted? Have you ever had to fight for love against impossible odds? Share your stories in the comments below. I love hearing from you. So do not go anywhere. Click that next video right now and let me take you on another unforgettable journey through history's greatest love stories. And if you enjoyed Elara and Kieran's tale, please like this video and subscribe to K Historical Romance so you never miss a story that will keep you captivated from beginning to end.